So Mr. Lindsey Graham has done something that he is all too good at, which is stuff his entire foot in his mouth with these remarks that he recently gave us and that I would like to discuss and tear apart because it's completely idiotic, as he so often is. So this is an article from The Hill, and the title of the article is this, and this is a statement from Graham himself: "These are the most dangerous times since the late 30s." So this is his commentary essentially over a speech or remarks that Joe Biden recently gave, I believe, surrounding the January 6th ordeal. So the article goes as follows. Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican of South Carolina, predicted on Sunday that in 2022 Americans will vote not based on what happened on January the 6th, but based on this failed Democratic radical agenda, claiming that because of that agenda, the nation has fallen into the most dangerous time since the late 1930s. Graham said in an interview with John Catismatis on WABC 770 AM that former President Trump would win his next election bid, and that the Republican Party would make sweeping gains in the November midterm elections because liberal policies do not represent America. "We are not a socialist country," he said, criticizing talks of packing the U.S. Supreme Court or abolishing the Electoral College. "What Democrats are trying to do is tear up the Constitution. They are trying to change the balance of power in this country. This is the most radical approach to our constitutional checks and balances in my lifetime, maybe ever. There is going to be a backlash in 2022. The senator cast doubt that the events of January 6, 2021, when pro-Trump supporters stormed the U.S. Capitol in an attempt to prevent Congress from certifying the 2020 election results, would spur Americans to vote blue in the next election." Graham called January 6 a dark day for the country and reiterated his calls for those who participated in the riot to be prosecuted, saying people need to be punished, and they will be. But he said he didn't blame Trump for the actions of the rioters. President Biden on Thursday accused Trump of indirectly inciting the January 6 uprising, saying on the anniversary of the event, "For the first time in our history, a president had not just lost an election, he tried to prevent the peaceful transfer of power as a violent mob breached the Capitol." And there's also another quote from Biden here, but I think I'll just stop there because I think you kind of get the idea. But this is absolutely amazing, and this is something that the Republicans have been doing more often now in more recent times. And I'm going to spell out to you what the game is before I really get into this. So people like Lindsey Graham, people that are completely and utterly bought and owned. He's a bitch to his corporate donors and entities that donate to him. They own him. He's a slave to them, right? So he doesn't want any kind of progressive, any good legislation, period, for the American people, because that's just who he is. Once again, he's a bitch to his donors. So his game, and pretty much every other Republican and many of the Democrats' game, is to say, oh, well, these liberal policies, these progressive policies, the ones that actually help regular people, aren't good for them, and they're radical, and they throw out scare words like, oh, this isn't a socialist country. And then they like to fall back on, but the Constitution, when the Constitution contains nowhere in it rhetoric against single-payer healthcare, or rhetoric against something like free college or an extended civil liberties like legalizing drugs or decriminalizing them at the very least. I mean, they like to fall back on this ridiculous jargon, hopefully trying to persuade people with their propaganda and with their lies, when honestly they're not really speaking for themselves. And maybe they are, maybe they're just so ideologically fucked that they believe that nonsense. But Lindsey Graham, at the very least, is speaking for the corrupt entities that already own our government. Let me just state that first and foremost, because that, to me, is the most important thing to understand. He isn't speaking facts. He isn't speaking from logic. He's speaking from a corrupted little slave boy that does what his donors tell him to do. Okay, now, point number 2. He says that these are the most dangerous times since the late 1930s. First of all, you're wrong in so many respects that I can't even begin to describe. But because I want to keep this video rather short, I'll try to do so very briefly. You're wrong in the aspect of he's trying to compare what Joe Biden and his administration is doing now to what FDR did in the 1930s. First of all, they're nowhere close to what FDR did in the 1930s. Let's just do a quick rundown. We're not going to go really into intricate details, but just a quick rundown of what FDR did in the 1930s. We had what they call the Roaring 20s, which, need I remind you, in the 20s, it was some of the biggest wealth inequality we've ever seen in this country. Taxes on the rich were super low, which led to the bust. It's that boom bust cycle, and we got the bust, and there was the Great Depression. And coming out of it, FDR saw that there was a moment and he needed to do things to meet that moment. But it wasn't just him. He was pushed. He was pushed by a large American labor force that was becoming aware, that were unionizing. Two very strong socialist parties at the time, a Communist Party and the CIO. And they came to him and they said, look, man, we need something. And he somewhat rose to the occasion. He took the reform route over the revolution route, and he gave us a federal jobs program that employed at least 15 million people. He gave us the first ever minimum wage in this country. Now, to remind you, the minimum wage that he passed at the time was worth way more than what the current federal minimum wage does now in today's times. He passed unemployment insurance that had never been done before. He passed Social Security, which we had never had before. Groundbreaking legislation that is overwhelmingly popular today that a dumbass like Lindsey Graham would actually prefer to take away from you. Keep that in mind. If given the chance, do you think Lindsey Graham would further fund Social Security or strip it? Do you think Lindsey Graham would like to raise the minimum wage or keep it as it is? Ask yourself those questions when you're alone, in your room. Okay. Look, man, and to compare it to what Joe Biden, his administration is on right now, they're proposing meager social reforms. I hesitate to call them even reforms, like the impact that these things will have. Will they help people? Sure. But in the grand scheme of things, they don't do a whole lot to ameliorate the pain and the suffering that people are currently enduring. I mean, look, if you look at the Build Back Better agenda when it was in its quote unquote entirety, the $3.5 trillion bill that is no more, the provisions in that were overwhelmingly popular. The American people aren't stupid. People aren't stupid in general. They understand what would help them. They understand that lower drug prices would help them, that they would like paid family and medical leave. They're not idiots that would reject those things simply because you call them radical, because you're beholden to your donors. They know that's common sense stuff that other countries have already eclipsed and gone way farther beyond. But because we are, have been propagandized and our government is more corrupt than some of these other systems, we don't have those things, and we can't share those delightful moments with these other industrialized countries, right? But look, man, to sum it up, this guy and many others would like to roll the clocks back, and they just want to change history. FDR was the president during these radical and dangerous times that he's describing. FDR is the most popular president in history. He was elected 4 times. He was elected once and he was reelected 3 times after that. He died. He died, and then the opposition party swept in and did term limits because they said, you know what? If another guy like him shows up, a guy that would prefer a social democracy and maybe even something beyond that, we will never win. They knew they couldn't beat him. And then, on terms of taxation, the rich in this country are taxed at an all-time low these days. During the days of FDR, the marginal tax rate for wealthy people was, I believe, in the 90s. Now, that wasn't the effective rate. The effective rate was like 45%, I believe. But it's way higher than what it is today. And he went after them. He went after the business community, and he seized their wealth to pay for the reforms that he had implemented that were incredibly popular, that the people saw the benefits of. And slowly after he did all these things, we refer to that time in which, the people benefited from the things that they all came collectively together to do as the golden age of economic expansion. And Lindsey Graham and many others would like to try to propagandize you and change your mind and make you think like somehow the things that Roosevelt did were ineffective, they were radical, when in fact it's nothing like that of the sort. He was incredibly popular. These things were incredibly amazing. But like I said, they want to rewrite history. They want to propagandize you. And look, hopefully this shit doesn't work. It doesn't seem like it works when you check the polls. But look, this is Lindsey Graham in a nutshell, doing what he's supposed to do, which is run propaganda and serve his incredibly rich donors.